Hello again and welcome to another reading of my book. We're on to chapter 15 from Experiences from Life. And this study is taken from where Maurice is preaching on Blessed are the Peacemakers from the Sermon on the Mount. So this is a little précis of what Maurice said first of all. Peace is something everyone wants, from the militant anti-nuclear activists of the peace movement to the ordinary man in the street. Everybody would say they want peace on earth. And Christianity promises it. The angels announced it at Jesus' birth. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. And here, in this beatitude, we are called to be peacemakers. But Jesus didn't say, blessed are the peaceful. This is not to do with having peace in ourselves. Being peaceful is a passive thing. A cemetery is the most peaceful place on earth. Nearly every gravestone has the words, rest in peace, engraved on it. But peacemaking is an active thing. Dead people cannot make peace. But in Psalm 34, verse 14, we're instructed to seek peace and pursue it, to actively chase after it. Peace. It's a very desirable yet elusive thing. Because of my background, peace never came easily to me, as I never knew quite how to bring it about. The Bible says that a kind answer turns away wrath, but I didn't know how to say kind things. Specific things in my life do stand out to me, however, as I recognise that God gave me wisdom and helped me to have a real and right attitude towards particular situations. You know, people who have no peace are not happy people. At 16 years of age, I left home and thought at last I could be happy because I'd have the peace I was craving. But it didn't take me long to realise that peace came from within and not from without. Being Dad's pet as a child had its compensations. And the resentment and jealousy that this provoked in my older sister, brother and mother didn't cause me too much concern until I reached the age of 6 when my youngest sister was born and she stole all my father's affection. She was so innocent and sweet. And by this time, I'd become a cheeky little brat. No one had time for me at home anymore. Dad regarded me as too outspoken. Mum, my brother and sister thought of me as being Dad's pet, spoilt and a real pest. Consequently, I was out of the house as much as possible and did my utmost to be accepted into other people's families. The chores that I found so irksome to do when forced at home were the things that I delighted to do in other people's houses because I knew that my neatness and cleanliness would earn me praise and recognition. Unfortunately, the chip on my shoulder and the resentment were growing every day and couldn't be missed in my attitude. And parents would often end up telling their children to keep away from me because they thought I would be a bad influence upon them. The treatment I received from family, friends and teachers alike hurt me tremendously as a youngster, and I'd spend hours going for lonely walks with the family dog to sit in the woods or fields where I'd cry away my frustration and pain. This was the only way I cried. I never used to let people know how their reactions or words affected me, for fear of them thinking that I was weak. My exterior told everybody that I was brash, rebellious and hard, but inside I was really sore and wanted so much for someone to love and understand me. The dog was a great comfort. She didn't utter a word, but she'd sit beside me and look away the tears that fell so freely down my face. And when my crying was all done and there were no more tears left in me, I'd put on my fighting gloves again, telling myself I didn't care, and I'd go back home to battle once more. If my troubles had been emotional only, that would have been bad enough. But Dad had been a champion boxer when he was in the army, and the physical violence that occurred in our household far outweighed any verbal violence, as on these occasions the police had to intervene and sometimes there'd be a hospital admittance. Although I'd run away from home or been thrown out of the house by my parents on numerous occasions, at the age of 16, when my parents finally gave their written consent for me to leave the nest, I'm sure that their relief was as great as mine. I'd been going to church since I was 9 years old, yet it was much later that I'd become involved in activities. 15, I'd become the church secretary, organist, and a member of the church group. On hindsight, I'm so grateful that God prepared me to be on my own at the age of 16, because if I hadn't been so involved in these church activities with my attitude, I don't know where I'd have ended up. All I knew when I left home was that I had a 2-roomed furnished flat and more freedom than I had ever known before. I was the only one ruling my life at this point. There were no parents or teachers telling me what to do. On one hand, I felt incredibly excited at the prospect of all this freedom. Yet on the other hand, I felt very vulnerable indeed. I had suddenly been landed with responsibilities and I'd never known anything about them. Paying the rent, bills. But there and then I made my decision that even if I starved, I would never go back home. For a few months, everything seemed to be going well. Gradually, I began to let down my defences and relax a little, and this probably allowed my subconscious to take over, because I began to be troubled with nightmares. Night after night, I'd wake up screaming, sobbing and sweating, reliving in my dreams some of the traumatic experiences I'd passed through. These nightmares were painful and horrible, and I prayed earnestly that God would set me free from them. But week after week they continued, until I got to the stage where I was really frightened to go to bed at night. My appearance was beginning to suffer because of my sleepless nights. I had huge bags under my eyes. At the end of one of the music practice evenings, Maurice, who was then the leader of the music group, asked me why I was looking so unwell. I'd never shared my home life with any member of the church for 2 reasons. 1, I didn't think they'd believe me. And 2, I thought that they would probably think that I brought everything upon myself. So I kept quiet and had become very suspicious, thinking that every family in the church was the same as ours. For 18 months prior to these nightmares, I'd spent a lot of time at the office in the minister's house, as I was the church secretary, and he'd done his utmost to make me feel at home. After eating the Saturday midday meal with his family, I'd go down into the office to do my work, but it wouldn't be long before the minister and I would be deep in conversation. And he'd spend hours explaining scriptures to me, talking about God in such a way that sometimes my heart felt as though it would burst with gratitude for the fact that God had allowed me to become a Christian. Those times of fellowship and communion that I shared with him boosted me so that it made all my past and present difficulties insignificant. I knew that he was a real Christian. He was the real thing. His lifestyle and family life was so different from my own, and I desperately wanted the relationship that he had with Jesus Christ for myself. Well, as Maurice was the minister's son, when he asked me why I was looking so unwell, I felt less inhibited to share my problems with him, because I thought it'd be something like his father and would show me sympathy and understanding. But I was sadly mistaken. After sharing my nightmares with Maurice, he looked straight into my face and quoted a verse of scripture to me. If any man says he loves God and hates his brother, that man is a liar. That's from 1 John chapter 4, verse 20. He went on to say that it was obvious that by my attitude that I had a real problem with hatred and bitterness. And if I wanted to be a Christian, then I had to make a decision to forgive. After all, that's what Christianity is. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That's Matthew 6, verse 12. Well, I can't convey to you the feelings of anger that I had towards Maurice at that particular point in time. I felt so frustrated because I knew he had no conception of the sort of background I'd come from. I'd only been with his family for a short time, but I knew that they behaved in a completely different way to my own. So it was impossible for him to understand where I was coming from. In a rage, I stormed out of the church. And feeling totally justified about my attitude, I vowed that I would not forgive my parents until I was asked by them for forgiveness. Until this point, I don't think I'd ever truly realised the extent of my hatred and bitterness towards my parents. There seemed to be like a fire burning within me that couldn't be quenched. The nightmares continued, and this burning sensation continued. I had no peace because I knew what Maurice had said was the truth, and God wouldn't let me get away from the fact that I had a responsibility towards my own salvation. Well, I remember sitting down one night in my flat and rationally thinking over the situation. I'd left home some time ago. When I was still living with my parents, my sarcasm and vicious actions used to hurt them, and I received a good deal of satisfaction from this fact. But now that I'd been left home, any murderous thoughts and feelings that I had towards my parents were no longer affecting them. My hatred and bitterness was hurting no one but me. I despised the idea of eating humble pie, but I really did want to be a real Christian. In my short lifetime, I'd witnessed the genuine and the false, and I knew which I wanted. It took a great deal of effort, but I eventually prayed that God would heal me. I didn't ask that God would take away the hatred. At this point, I couldn't ask for that to be replaced with love, but I did ask that God would do a miracle and change me. Well, miraculously, the nightmares stopped immediately. And each night, I would pray through gritted teeth that God would heal me, take away the hatred, and change my attitude towards them. God had a lot to do to soften me up inside. I only understood situations from my point of view. And God had to show me that other people had backgrounds too. Everyone has a story to tell. He began to remind me of experiences my parents had been forced to pass through whilst growing up. At the time, I'd ignored what my parents had to say, thinking that that was their problem and nothing to do with me. But now that God was bringing it to my mind, I realised that everyone is a product of their environment. And God gradually gave me understanding for my parents. Well, from the bottom of my heart, I finally forgave them for the things that had gone on in my past, and my prayers began to change. I no longer asked God to take away the hatred and change my attitude towards them. My prayer changed to, Lord, please bless my parents and show them the kindness that you've shown to me. When I began to pray this prayer in all honesty, I really did feel the peace of God flowing into my heart. The years since I was 16 have proved what a thorough work God did in my heart, because even though there was no communication from my parents to me, I could still pray in all sincerity that God would bless them and show them the kindness he'd shown me. During my years of estrangement from my parents, I heard a sermon preached by my pastor which really helped me to come to terms with the situation. He was preaching about prophecy. He said the wonderful thing about prophecy was that it kept on being fulfilled over and over again. It wasn't necessarily just for one specific period. He talked about Jacob and Esau and how the prophecy his mother received when she was pregnant told of the struggle going on in her womb. But the struggle didn't end there. The prophecy was fulfilled over and over again during their lives. He said that our lives were prophetic. He looked at other people in the Bible as illustrations, and it was clear that what he said was true. Encouraged by what I'd heard, I took a look at my own life. I remembered my parents telling me that the umbilical cord had been wrapped around my neck, and the midwives had cut the cord to prevent me from being strangled whilst being born. A natural birth would have killed me. Someone had to intervene. But the problem was that when I was cut free, my mother's womb was accidentally cut also, which caused her unbelievable complications. Her womb turned septic. She suffered a prolapse and fibroids. She underwent 2 major operations to no avail and was under specialists at the hospital who could do nothing for her. My mother was in constant pain and her womb was unable to hold pregnancies. On one occasion, a partially formed baby actually dropped from her body. She put it in a little pot and showed it to her doctor. When I was 6 years old, Mother did manage to have another child who was born prematurely, but was in so much pain during the pregnancy and birth that she feared having more children. When I was 9 years old, Mum was again pregnant with her 5th child. She was terrified of what was to come, but couldn't do anything about it. It was during this pregnancy that God stepped into her life. She and Dad became Christians and God miraculously healed my mother's body. She gave birth to my youngest sister, Faith, who weighed in at 9 pounds, 3 ounces and was perfect in every way. I started wondering what this could mean for me prophetically. It was necessary for me to be cut free from my mother's womb at birth. Otherwise, she'd have unintentionally killed me. My birth had forced Mum to endure years of physical pain. Indeed, it was only God healing. It was only when God healed her that she could lead a normal life again. Mum had always held a grudge against me for the pain she suffered. I'd been the cause and she resented me for it. She'd never got on well with me. There was a constant clash between us. But during that service, I began to realise that as God had done a miracle and healed Mum physically, so he would need to do a miracle to heal her spiritually towards me. She couldn't do anything about her condition of heart towards me. The hurt had gone too deep. God had to do a miracle. Even though I could clearly see that this situation was completely beyond my control, it gave me great encouragement to know what I was to pray for. I began asking for God to do a miracle to soften Mum's heart, and did everything I could to bridge the gap between us. I did things in secret. I did things openly, but nothing changed her attitude. She was as hard as granite. Ministers tried to intervene to get us together, but she would have none of it, saying emphatically that she did not want reconciliation. I gave birth to my first child on the 10th of November 1991, and having photos of Maurice and myself with Nathan just 8 days after his birth, decided to send her a copy of the photo with a Christmas card. Surely the sight of a little grandchild would soften her. I obviously thought wrong. Within a couple of weeks, the card and the photo were returned, and the envelope stated that they no longer knew me. When Nathan was 2 years old, I decided to drop in on my parents unannounced. I rang the doorbell, then I hid out of sight of the spy hole in the front door so that my parents couldn't see me. The door opened and I popped my head out saying, "Hi!" I beamed a great smile at my mother. She was shocked to see me, to say the least, and asked what I wanted. I said I'd called to see her and asked to be invited in. "Well, you'd better come in then. There's no point arguing on the doorstep for all the neighbours to see." They were so curt with me. But I was so friendly and exuberant that I just pushed to one side all their barriers and bamboozled my way back into their lives. Maurice and Nathan were in the car outside, so I brought them in. Dad immediately made a fuss of Nathan, as he adores children and everything seemed okay. But it didn't last long. With every visit I made, there were always sarcastic references to the pastor, who was now my father-in-law, which I found unbelievably hard to stomach. I realised that the reconciliation was completely one-sided. It had all come from me. I'd forced Mum into this situation and she wasn't comfortable. I decided to leave well alone and allow God to bring about the miracle in his own way. Then it would be real. I continued to pray, fast, cry, anything to attract God's attention to what was going on in the family, and I begged him to do something about it. Eventually, God did speak to me, and he told me he couldn't heal somebody who doesn't want to be healed. He could raise the dead. At last I understood. I had to treat Mum and Dad as though they were dead, like Lazarus or Jairus' daughter in the Bible, because then God could do a miracle by bringing them back to life, and he alone would get the glory, not man, because they had interfered. So from that moment onwards, I stopped all communication. No phone calls, no birthday or Christmas cards, no visit, nothing. I waited 7 years for the miracle, but when it happened, It was so simple and easy. Myra, my oldest sister, paid Mum and Dad a visit from Australia, and whilst in the country she came to see me. I had a couple of apple trees in the garden and I knew that Mum enjoyed baking, so I asked Myra to take some for her. The next time Myra came to see me, she brought me some choc ices, which apparently Mum couldn't fit into her freezer. When Myra had gone back to Mum's house, I rang my parents to thank them. Dad answered the phone, and after saying a quick "thank you for the choc ices," I put the phone down. Myra went home to Australia, and a couple of days later I had a phone call from Mum. She wanted to thank me for the apples that I'd left on her doorstep. But I hadn't left any apples on her doorstep. I tried to tell her the truth, but before I could finish, she asked which buses she would have to get to reach my house if she wanted to come round. I was shocked. "Don't be daft. If you want to come round, I'll pick you up in my car," I said. "Well, which day would be most convenient for you?" she asked. My head was spinning. She'd visited me once, at the most twice, since I'd left home at the age of 16. And at this time of the telephone call, I was 48 years old. I arranged a time to collect her and Dad and put the phone down in a daze. Well, sure enough, I brought them to my house, and it was as though they'd never been out of my life, except for the fact that there was a complete attitude change. My mother was the one in control now. She'd made the decision to make up with me and was not being forced. God did an incredible miracle. Maurice showed Mum and Dad round our offices and shared our work and vision with them. They were so impressed that the next time they saw us, they gave us a financial gift of £1,000 each. I didn't even know that they had £100 between them to rub together. Mum began going to house group meetings with Maurice and sometimes even came to our offices to help getting the challenge bulletins out for us when we used to print them. From being totally antagonistic, they became allies and blessed us. You know, it took many years for the miracle to happen. I was 9 years old when God healed my mother physically, but I was 48 years old when God healed her spiritually. It took 39 years for me to see his promise come to pass. We may not always be able to have peace with men, but we are told to pursue it. And as Christians, we have no excuse for not having peace with God. And bitterness and unforgiveness are two of the major hindrances to true peace in any Christian's hearts. So now you've heard. God bless you.